You are watching Live with Dr. Kimber. Come on in and have a seat at the table.
Hold on. That's not live yet. It's not live yet. Hold on. Okay.
You are watching Live with Dr. Kimber. Come on in and have a seat at the table.
Good evening and welcome to Dr. Kimber, Live with Dr. Boise Kimber. We're delighted that you have joined us on this evening. We have a very, very special guest who will be sitting at the table with us, talking with us tonight. I'm delighted to have the Reverend Stephen Cousin, who is the pastor of the Bethel AME Church here in the city of New Haven. Good evening, Pastor
Hey,
Cousin.
thank you so much for inviting me to the table. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. I happen to like you. That's why you're sitting at this table. I think you're a very smart young man, and I appreciate our relationship and the working together. Can you give us a little history about yourself and family and how you got to New Haven?
Let's see, where do I begin? I'll start by saying I am a fourth generation preacher. My great grandfather was presiding elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My grandfather served as a bishop of this church. My father is currently pastoring. My four uncles are currently passing all across, this country. And now I am currently serving as a pastor in New Haven, born in Birmingham, Alabama in the 80s and graduated from the University of Connecticut in the mid 2000s, and just so happy to be back in New Haven in 2013. So I'm glad to be back on this side of the Mississippi.
Man, that's great. Now, you know we are homeboys. I'm from Phoenix City, Alabama. Did I tell you that before?
You told me that before, and I told you that my father passed Gaines Chapel in Phoenix City.
That's
And
right, Gain Chapel, right,
yeah,
right across the street from my home church, Franchise Missionary Baptist Church. I mean, it was just maybe 10 feet away from each other. The new church, and then Gaines Chapel just built a new church
yeah,
probably about 8 or 9 years ago.
I remember
Yeah,
growing up.
very, very good, very good. And did you remember Reverend Body?
No, I do not remember that name.
Yeah, he was the presiding elder back in the day there. Listen, you have been in New Haven how long now?
7 years now.
You've been in 7 years, and you have been very active since you have been here in the city of New Haven. You are a fire commissioner here in the city, and we
Yes,
appreciate you being on that board. I sit on that board. I sit on that board for about 9 years, and I think I raised a little hell while I was on that board. I was taken all the way to the Supreme Court. Yeah, just a little. Yeah. So, and you're also on this committee with the state. Let's talk about that committee that you are sitting on because it has to do with policing. And that is what we are trying to deal with all across this nation by virtue of what happened to George Floyd. It has been an awakeness in our country in reference to him having a knee on his neck by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Talk to us about that committee.
I think that, speaking to your point about awakening the consciousness of this country, where we see a lot of, shootings that occur with officers and unarmed African Americans. But I think this case is different because you literally see an officer holding his knee on this young man's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Mm.
And just seeing his life being taken away from him. And we as a nation have to grapple and grasp with what's going on in our society. I think that's the biggest difference why you see this consciousness being reawoken during this time. And so, to your point, with this task force that was put together, we were assigned for the Police Accountability and Transparency Task Force, commissioned by the state, to really look at the policies, procedures, protocols of not just, local police departments, but at a state level, what can we do to bring about change to ensure that an incident in Minneapolis does not occur at any level in the state of Connecticut?
So, how many people sit on that committee?
Right now, I'm going to say at least between 8 to 9 people who are voting members. Then you have those who are there as consultants. So, all in all, our meetings may range between having 15 people total to about 30 persons at large, because it still is a public meeting as well. So, more the public's able to come in and listen to what we're discussing.
So, what is this committee charged to do, and what does this committee want to do in reference to police accountability, police brutality?
So, we are charged to do, two things. First, to actually start making recommendations around policy and procedure. We're supposed to submit our findings to the Judiciary Committee that's spearheaded by Senator Gary Holder Winfield. And we're actually supposed to complete our work by the end of this year. And then with our recommendations, to the state body about what can be done. But given the height of where we are right now, given law enforcement and communities of color, it seemed like our work is being expedited to an extent where there is some action that needs to be taken right now. So we were really governed with, hey, have 5 or 6 months to really look at and really do some studying, to now looking at what can we get done in the immediate aftermath of this tragedy. And so we are now setting up committees, and we're basing our work around President Obama's 21st Century Task Force that, he created after the incident in Ferguson. And so we're taking those policies where now it's like 6 pillars with their recommendation, with their reporting regarding community policing, oversight, policies, social media, and we're now breaking down our work into those particular pillars and really looking at what can we do in terms of holding officers accountable for when incidents like this occur, and also talking about how can we make the process transparent. What we're finding out is when you go make a complaint, the process may be different if you're filing one in Bridgeport as opposed to New Haven. So how can we have a uniform system? And also talking with posts, how can we make this post standards uniform across all local municipalities, where every municipality has maybe a different statute or a different mandate in regards to how they go about policing their communities. So we're really trying to figure out how can we make the system more uniform, unilateral, and accessible to the community at large.
Very good. So, can you tell me what policies that you are looking at, and will these policies interfere with the policies that Post is doing and that our local police departments are doing?
Well, what we're trying to do is really focus on like a couple of things we're looking at that are on the table. Of course, we're talking about training in regards to de-escalation and implicit bias, but we're also looking at actually expanding the services or the standards through post to actually decertify police officers.
Hmm.
And right now,
Interesting.
well, that's really going to be the key because, as you know, in this system, you can leave one police department and get hired at another police department. Where
Right.
currently the officer that shot Tamir Rice in Ohio has now been hired by another police department. And so we're trying to find a way how to really cut that off, where we can actually, broaden the scope to actually decertify police officers. We're also looking at civilian review boards, for local municipalities, for them to be involved in the process when the complaint is filed and actually be able to give their review or their recommendations in terms of what happened to the officers. We're also looking at the scope of services that the officer, is providing right now, where the question is, should police officers be social workers? Where most of their calls in the local newspaper, the New Haven Independent, it was reported that over 94% of the calls that are made to the 911 dispatcher are nonviolent offenses. So, do we really need police officers who are armed to actually go out on mental health services call? And so, we're looking at a broad scope of things where we're trying to figure out what can be done, what's feasible, what's reasonable, and move from there. But those are just a few of the things that we're talking about.
Hey, that sounds excellent. Listen, in this country, there are people talking about defunding police departments, and they are also talking about policies that police departments have now that is somewhat against civilians once they go and try to arrest them. Talk about that for a moment.
So, in terms of the national conversation with defunding the police, it all depends what spectrum you fall on. There were those who are talking about abolishing police departments altogether. Camden, New Jersey did something similar where they really answered the question that their police department was beyond reform. And so they actually made it into a county police department where now they're able to actually renegotiate or review union contracts. And so we're asking ourselves the question, is the police department beyond reform? And what does it mean to defund? We're not necessarily at the point of abolishing the police department, but we are looking at is the services that they're providing, can it be used for other different professionals or companies? And so right now you have New Haven Police Department budget that's 41 million. Bridgeport's police department budget is 100 million. And
Ooh.
so you ask yourself the question, where is that money going? And is it being best spent in these police departments, or it can be better spent for health, mental health services, or what have you?
Let me ask you this. We're talking in this city about um, eight things that this New Haven Police Department is looking at abolishing, looking at trying to enhance. Talk to me about those eight different things and share with our audience in reference to them.
So this is the national campaign of the Black Lives Matter organization, that they believe that if these eight policies were to be instantly implemented, they can reduce police shootings up to 71%, if I'm not mistaken. And so some of those eight policies are: one, ban all chokeholds, strangleholds. Number two, don't shoot at moving vehicles. Number three, do not, you have to announce yourself before you actually go inside the house within the arrest warrant. Number four, you have to do comprehensive reporting. Number five, provide more de-escalation training. Just some out the 8 that I'm able to remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But and also be able to fire a warning shot before you shoot at the target or at the victim, what have you. And so the Board of Alders charged our police department, New Haven Police Department, to take a look at those 8 initiatives and come back with their response. And thankfully, the New Haven Police Department has already dealt or somewhat addressed those 8 policies in their general orders and statutes. So with the chokeholds, strangleholds, for example, they cannot use it for normal use, but they can only use it in case of if they feel that they are in bodily danger or their life can be lost, where a stranglehold is actually, to be implemented. Or, shooting at a moving target, it will say that they will not shoot at a moving target unless it presents a danger to themselves, or even providing a warning shot if it's feasible to do so. So,
Listen,
yes.
the problem that I am having is that they are not abolishing uh, the chokehold nor the strangle individual. They are not abolishing that. Police officers have gotten off the hook simply because they say my life is in danger, was in danger, and this is why I did. I want to see stronger language. How can we enforce stronger language to those 8 items in which they have given us?
And that is a difficult question to answer because they're always going to say that if they feel that their life is in danger, anything goes. And you hear that narrative that's being played out that I want to make sure I can go home to my family. And so, with that, it's very hard to articulate because you can't legislate feelings. So, what me and you may see on the camera, where we say that officer was not in danger for him to pull out his weapon, where there was no threat, and the officer could come back and say, well, even though it may look that way, you can't tell me how I feel. And so, how do you go about trying to regulate feelings, how a person feel? Although I may not agree with what you feel, we can now argue that maybe that's what they were thinking and feeling at the time. So, to your point, I think there needs to be stronger language and actually breaking down various scenarios of, instead of just giving that gray area, I think we need to provide more detail, more insight of that actually gives scenarios as when it's appropriate to shoot and when it's appropriate not to shoot.
Listen, so this officer who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd, can he actually say that his life was in danger?
And we right now, I have not heard that argument, but I'm pretty sure that argument can be made. Where the bigger question is, and this also part of the 8 Can't Wait campaign, you have to have the duty to intervene. Why is it that those officers around him did not intervene when it was going on? And I just saw a report where an officer in 2006 intervened when her fellow officer was actually choking somebody out, and she was fired for actually intervening. And so the case can be made that even if you intervene, you could face backlash or retribution. And given that situation, that officer can say, you don't know that person what he's capable of. I can take my knee off, and although he's handcuffed, I still see people get up and try to attack me or attack that person. So you never know what they can say, but it's very unfortunate that clearly he was no threat by our eyes, but they can still view that man as a threat, even being on the ground, being surrounded by 4 officers, and actually being detained.
So really, it's a lot of camouflage, and people are just talking. because these unions are so powerful that do you expect any laws to be put in place to regulate what these officers are doing?
Now that's where you start getting to the weeds, because you saw how the police union in New York came out against how they felt like they're being treated like animals and criminals, where they felt the protesters were the ones that were dangerous. You saw a police union come out in Florida that talked about that if you were to get fired from your police department, we will hire you down here. The unions are very powerful because they actually have lobbyists. They can actually start voting politicians out of office if they don't get their way. So you got to ask yourself the question: is there going to be political will that if we were to come across the unions, are we going to push forward or are we going to back off? And that's what I'm curious to see, because let's face it, the unions actually go vote. They're the ones who, no matter what election, in season, off season, what have you, they're going to organize their people to get the vote out. And that's what they will say. If we don't get our way, we're going to take a no vote of confidence. We're going to vote you out, and we're going to put somebody else in that will actually do what we need.
So, so tonight, as you are sitting at this table and talking about, the police department, the position that you are taking, the committee in which you're sitting on, it's going to be very difficult to try to enact some of these policies. We're sitting around the table, we're talking about them, but at the same time, when the contract for police officers come up, it always seems as though they get a better contract and that they are free to say at any time, my life was threatened. And that gets them off the hook. And so if they come in our neighborhood tonight and, um, Junebug is sitting on the corner, he see them, uh, he starts running, and they take out their gun and shoot, and they say, my life was threatened, and he had no gun or anything. So I have made up in my mind that if I see a police officer mistreating or choking or beating a person, I'm involved in the fight. It's no way in the world that I can sit on the sideline and allow them to take an individual life. I'm willing. I'm willing to give up what I if it means my life, then I got to deal with it. I got to deal with it. And so that's part of what is in me, since we are not going to be able to push these laws that should be in effect
You
for people. Now,
can,
I must give. I didn't hear you.
I was going to say, you can push the laws, but you have to be willing to be involved in the political process. And for some of us, it's long. The work is tiring, it's arduous, and is so difficult. But too many times we just want an instant fix to everything. Where we're in
Mhm.
the season right now, let's try to get something done within a month, and then we wipe our hands clean of it. No, if you're going to be committed, you got to be committed when there's no press, there's no media, and you actually got to be involved on the ground, going up to the state capitol, understanding who your representatives are, putting the phone calls, writing the letters, saying that you're asking for change. Because real talk, people only do by who's voting. If you're
Mhm.
not voting, they're not really trying to hear from you. They may sit in the room with you, but they know there's no teeth to what you're saying because you're not involved in the process. And so it's up for our people to actually come out and vote in every single election to show our numbers. That's how laws get passed. That's how things happen when you actually are in the room when there's nobody else watching you. There's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, there's no WTNH, there's no New Haven Independent. These are the ones who are in the room because they believe this is what's right, and I'm committed to the very end.
Let me say you're listening to Dr. Boise Kimber live with Reverend Stephen Cousin sitting at our table on tonight. I think you're so right in reference to voting, and we've got to get out and vote. We got to get out and vote if we want to make change and the system. We have got to get out and vote. Marching is good. I've been marching all my life. But if you don't march to the poll, what you've been marching for will be insignificant. And so we've got to rally people to know who their legislators are, to know what the issues are, and to march to the poll, especially in November. Coronavirus, yeah, people want to vote absentee ballots. I'm going to the poll. I'm going to stand in line because I want to make sure that some changes occur and changes happen. Let me ask you this: a couple final questions. Taisha Walker, who is the president of the Board of Alders here, she's made a bold move and putting together a civilian review board. And I certainly like to thank her for finally they named this board years and years ago, and finally it has been named and put into action. Want to talk about this review board that is at hand in our city and what will they be charged to do?
So, to my understanding, you're looking at it from two different points, and that's not clear to me. I think that our alder, Taisha, can really speak to this. But I think one of the biggest challenges were for the CRB board was when do they get involved in the process in terms of the investigation? Do they get involved at the very beginning when the complaint is filed, and do they work with IA, or do they get involved after IA has completed their report and they actually able to go back and review it? I know that was one of the sticking points to the this civilian review board right now. And for me personally, a civilian review board is only as good as those who are willing to support it and enforce it. I know one of the issues was, does the civilian review board have subpoena power? I'm pretty sure that's going to get challenged in the courts, where this CRB, if they were to subpoena an officer or what have you, and that officer refuses to come in, I'm pretty sure that's going to get challenged. And so I'm still waiting to see. There's still a lot of unknown variables as to how this civilian review board is going to be operating, but I am optimistic. I do believe that we have a great police department that will actually support the civilian review board. The community is asking for it, but also holding the officers accountable, where, giving the authority to make recommendations for suspension or for terminations. I do believe they can make the recommendations, but ultimately that decision is going to fall with the Board of Police Commissioners. And so I think the lines clearly has to be drawn to the extent of where the power goes. Where does it begin? Where does it end? Is it after the IA completes their investigation? Is it, do they work with IA jointly to actually do the investigation? And do they actually were to submit a report for termination or for suspension and submit it to the police chief to go to the Board of Police Commissioners? So we're going to see.
That's great. My final question tonight to you is that there have been conversation about removing police officers from the high schools in New Haven. So talk to me about that. Give me your point of view. And this is my final question with you tonight.
Okay, so first off, I just want to say thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure to sit at the table with you. Regarding the SROs, I believe that program was implemented 25 years ago due to the violence that was occurring in our school system, and that program was needed. And so, especially during times that we're living in now, we always ask ourselves the question, you know, just to get rid of police department, get rid of police altogether. We see various cities across the country who are severing their ties with the police departments in the school. So there is a precedence there. I know Minneapolis just did it with their board of ed severing their ties with their police department in their school system. For us, we have to ask ourselves the question, why was the SRO program put in place initially? And do we need it now, 25 years later? Have we made any progress? Have we made any improvements along the way? And I really believe that's what the question we have to ask ourselves. My concern is with the SROs, you have one side of the community that's advocating to get rid of the SROs altogether. You have another side that's saying, no, we need them for, protection, safety, security. So you have both sides really competing against each other. And I really believe that we can have a compromise where we don't necessarily have to take the SROs out the schools. Right now, we have seven, eight if we were to include the sergeant that's over those officers. We can even look at reducing the numbers. I believe we have between 8 to 10 high schools in New Haven that the SROs are a part of, involved with. Do we need seven? Can we look at having five or four, what have you, and just to see how that goes? Or do we take them out altogether to see the progress that we have made? Me personally, I do believe that we need to try to see, can we scale back just to see have we actually made some improvements in these 25 years. We can let this be a gauge to see how far we've come or how much more work we have to do. My biggest concern, and not to be fear stoking or stroking, but if you were to remove the SROs out the school altogether, and God forbid there's a shooting that did occur in the school, the first thing that we're going to say is, if we had not removed those SROs out the school building in the first place, this probably would have never happened. And are we willing to take that chance and take that risk and allowing for that conversation to occur? And so I would say we don't have to completely rip the band-aid off. We can try to peel it off slowly. Let's see what happens if we were to reduce the numbers. And we got to remember, the SRO program is not funded through the Board of Education. It's funded through the police department. It's something that they're doing. And so, and right now, their budget just got slashed by another $4 million. I'm pretty sure they can use those 7, 8 officers that were assigned to these schools to actually go back in the field, in the department, and actually try to replenish their numbers. But they really see a need for this program too, but they want to listen to the community. I say, let's reduce it, see where we are in terms of, a year or two from now, and go from there, revisit the conversation.
Thank you so very much, um, Pastor Cousin. You have been very informative to us on this evening. To our audience, you've been listening live to Dr. Boise Kimber with the Reverend Stephen Cousin sitting at the table, pastor of the Bethel AME Church. And I need to let y'all know he was born in Birmingham, Alabama. So see, that gives us um, uh, a better relationship because we're homeboys. We understand the struggle and what happened in Birmingham back in the 60s. Hey, listen, God bless each one of you for listening to us. And thank God for you. Thank God for Miss T, who is our producer. And we look forward to talking to you real soon. Have a good evening. Thank you, Pastor Cousin.